Right, hey everybody, welcome back to the podcast. Today we have the pleasure of sitting down with our repeat guest, the one and the only Bart Ehrman, to talk about his most recent book, Journeys to Heaven and Hell. And so, Bart, welcome back to the show, and thanks for making time for me.
Oh, thank you. I've enjoyed it before. I'm going to enjoy this one too. Thanks.
Thank you. So let's jump right in, listeners. If you want to know more about Bart, either take to Google. I don't trust everything you read, but go do a Google search and you'll find some stuff about him, or go back to our last episode from last summer. He gave a little bit of an extended intro. But for now, this book, first of all, Bart, it's so good, and like most of your books, like 99% of the information is relatively new to this ex-evangelical man. And so maybe you could begin by telling us a bit about this book and how it differs from your other book, which is called Heaven and Hell, which people might be more familiar with. I know that Journeys is geared more towards scholars, it's put out by Yale. Heaven and Hell is more towards lay people. But what does that even mean? How are these two
Yeah,
books different?
yeah. Well, it's like any field of scholarship.
Hmm.
When scholars are talking to scholars, they use a certain kind of language and they have certain kinds of assumptions and presuppositions and things. And when they're
Hmm.
talking to lay people, but most scholars, of course, don't talk to lay people, but because they're not interested in doing it and because they
Sure.
can't do it.
Right.
If you're like, if you're an expert on, astrophysics or something, it's like, unless you really know how to forget it. And and of course, we're not talking astrophysics here, but we are talking about texts written in Greek and Latin from a long
Mhm.
time ago in the Roman world, and there's just a lot of presuppositions that scholars have that you have to explain to somebody who doesn't, hasn't had the training in the field. So,
Sure.
um, so the Heaven and Hell book I wrote for the, as you said, is for the lay audience,
Mhm.
presupposing almost nothing about, but trying to show that our ideas of heaven and hell are that you die and your soul goes to one place or the other.
Mhm.
That your soul either goes to heaven or hell at death. That even though that's the common view
Mhm.
throughout, not just throughout Christianity, but I'd say throughout much of the Western world. Um, it's not taught in the Old Testament, and it's not what Jesus taught. And so that book is about where did it come from then,
Mhm.
uh, and that's what that book is about. And so I call it a history of heaven and hell, not because it's not that heaven and hell had a history, but the ideas of heaven and hell had a
Sure.
history. That's what
Sure.
it's about. So this book, this other book, the Journeys book that you were just showing, is so it's called Journeys to Heaven and Hell,
Mhm.
and it's not about that. It's about a kind of a genre that you have in the ancient world, in which a person is given a guided tour
Mhm.
of the afterlife. Um, and so people are probably familiar with that from Dante's Divine Comedy.
Mhm.
Uh, so you get the three levels
Mhm.
in the Divine Comedy. Um, but my book is about the earliest Christian predecessors of that
Mhm.
uh, genre, because Dante's not making up the idea when he does the Inferno. He's not making up the idea of this journey. Uh, so the earliest version of this we have in the Christian tradition was in a book discovered in the 1880s. We knew
Mhm.
about it before, but we didn't have it. And it turns out it's a guided tour that Jesus gives to Peter
Mhm.
of heaven and hell. And so he sees all the torments of the damned, and he sees the blessings of the saved,
Mhm.
and so from there, so we go from there. And there are a number of these in the early Christian tradition that most people have never even heard of.
Mhm.
Some might have heard of the Apocalypse of Peter because it actually was a popular book in early Christianity. It almost made it into the New Testament. It was that
Mhm.
popular, but it ended up not making it. But then you have other books later, and I go through about five or six of these up through the fifth or sixth century. But the thing I do in my book that really makes it even more scholarly is that I situate these Christian journeys to heaven and hell in relationship to predecessors in the Greek and the Roman and the Jewish traditions,
Mhm.
going back to the Odyssey of Homer and Virgil's Aeneid and Lucian of Samosata, and then Jewish examples, and so it's trying to show that everyone who portrays one of these journeys of the afterlife is trying to say something about it,
Mhm.
and almost never are they really trying to say what it's about,
Sure.
what's going to happen. They're almost always using what they see as the realities of life after death to show you how you ought to live now.
Mhm.
given the fact of what's going to happen later. And they also
Right.
use what's going to happen later, and so they all use it in different ways. And so the point is to see how these different uh, stories are being used to describe how you ought to live in the here
Sure.
and
Sure. So the Apocalypse of Peter is one of the things I wanted to talk to you about because you have quite a section in there about it. And like you said, and I might set up this question wrong, so if I do, feel free to correct me. But you said that it almost made the cut into the Bible, but obviously it didn't. And from what I gathered from your book, it was at one point uh, widely accepted, I guess, in like the second, I think you said second and third centuries. Then
yeah.
like by the fourth, it started to dwindle a little bit. By the fifth, it's gone. I was wondering if you could talk to us a little bit about the significance that this particular text once held in the early centuries of Christianity. Like, first of all, why was it accepted? And then why was it like left out? And
Yeah.
secondly, like what insight does it bring into this conversation about journeys into heaven and hell? Obviously,
Yeah.
you said that Jesus is talking to Peter, takes him on this tour, but what does that even mean for this conversation?
Yeah. 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 Um, so we have early church fathers who talk about certain Christian books,
Mhm,
and some of them they just refer to the books, but sometimes they refer to them as scripture.
mhm,
Uh, and we have some church fathers that list the books that they think are part of the New
mhm,
Testament. This is in the centuries before we actually had a set list,
mhm.
and so the set list ends up being the 27 books of the New Testament. Um, Contrary, by the way, to what most people seem to think, the 27 books of the New Testament was never decided on at a church council or by a vote. A lot of people think that it happened at the Council of
That's
Nicaea.
what I was taught. Yeah,
Yeah, well, that's everybody says, and it's
yeah.
absolutely not true.
Mm,
It's just absolutely not true. I don't know where this idea started. It got
mm.
popularized, of course, by that inimitable historian of religion, Dan Brown, and the Da Vinci Code. And
One of your biggest
but
fans.
I mean, it just made up. They didn't
Right.
talk about this at the council. They didn't talk about the canon at the Council of Nicaea. It wasn't even talked about there.
Mm,
We know what they talk about. We have their agenda. We have their like, and so yeah, and it never was voted on. It wasn't
mm,
the first person to come up with a list. Our list of these books is was a figure named Athanasius, who was a
mhm,
bishop of Alexandria, and it's like in the 360s, and
mm,
he's the first one to list our books, and even then it wasn't decided. I mean, just kind of eventually there was a kind of an informal, just a basically an informal agreement. Everybody just basically agreed in the end, so there
mm,
was never a vote. But there were big issues about which books ought to be in. Almost everybody agreed with Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, but
mhm,
there were big disagreements about the Apocalypse of John,
mhm,
which did make it in, which at first people didn't think should be in, and the Apocalypse of Peter, which in the end did not make it in, but
mhm.
people did think it was going to be. So it's pretty interesting. So when you read the second and third century sources, they talk about the Apocalypse of Peter as a scriptural source, as one
Mm,
of the Christian scriptures. And they probably thought that because it claims to be written by Jesus' disciple Peter. It and so it has that kind of authority, and it's a description of the afterlife that many people found completely agreeable
mm.
because those sinners out there are going to get it, and he describes in graphic detail how they're going to get it.
Yeah.
So it's a very lurid description. There are everybody's punished according to their characteristic sin,
Mm,
and the punishments are not pleasant and they're eternal.
mhm,
Is how the book is often read. And so, all right, so it was accepted. It ended up by the fourth or fifth century being rejected,
mm,
and the reason is because it's a little bit complicated. So I have a
mm.
chapter kind of devoted to
Yep.
trying to explain how this works because
Yeah.
it gets down into the weeds. But we have different versions of the
Mhm,
Apocalypse of Peter. So your listeners, many of them will be familiar with the idea that the New Testament scribes changed it in places,
mhm,
and scribes changed the Apocalypse of Peter in places. And it wasn't until it was after the original discovery that we realized that the original version of the Apocalypse of Peter indicated that the punishments are not eternal,
mm,
that in fact Christ has pity on everybody in hell and
mm,
gets them out of there and takes them to heaven. And in the 4th and 5th centuries, that did not fly well. And so scribes changed the text, so it
Doesn't
didn't say
fly well
that
today either for many.
it would not fly well with me because man,
Right.
like you're not getting everybody out of there. You might get a few nice people, but you ain't getting Hitler out of there.
That's right.
And so, but like everybody gets out. And
Yeah.
so, and so they ended up condemning it for
Mm,
that reason. And so that's why it didn't get in.
mm,
But in the whether it has that universalistic strain or not, the idea
mhm,
that there's universal salvation, that everybody gets saved, with or without that, the point of the book is pretty clear. If you obey God and follow Jesus, you're going to have a glorious afterlife. And if you engage in sin, you live in sin, you're going to be tortured forever, or
mm.
tortured, for a few centuries. So which do you want?
Right.
And so the idea, so this one has a pretty basic idea. You better shape up or you're in trouble.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, did the changes that were made, like, can you speculate at all about why would those specific changes be made? Do they reflect like a change in thinking that was going on in Christianity at the time? Was this like
Yeah.
a small group of people who made the decision to make this change? Like, why? That seems like a really big change to make. It's not like we're just changing a couple of
Big,
words. We're changing a
big,
big idea. Does that reflect
yeah.
a shift in theology?
Yeah, it's a big shift in theology. And the
Mhm,
weird thing is, it does just involve a few sentences, a couple sentences,
mhm,
because um, the Peter and the other apostles are very upset that these people are being tormented because they're hearing them scream, and it's not nice. You're having red red hot pokers driven into your ear, into your
mm,
eyes by demons forever. It's just like it's not good. And so they beg Jesus to show mercy.
mm,
And in the original text, he did show mercy.
mm,
But then later scribes, there were different editions of it. And so the reason we know they got changed is because I mentioned that it was discovered in the 1880s.
mhm,
That was a Greek version of it that was discovered in a guy's tomb in a cemetery in Egypt. They dug up this tomb, they found this book in it, and it
mm,
had this thing in it. They whoa, that's the Apocalypse of Peter. But then about 30 years later, they realized that we had it in an Ethiopic translation. Uh, and the Ethiopic, even though it was originally written in Greek, the Ethiopic translation was
mm,
almost certainly based on an earlier form of the Greek text,
mm,
than the Greek text we had. So this is
right.
where we start getting complicated. And then some decades later, they found a couple little scraps of papyrus that had some writings of something on it. They realized this is from the Apocalypse of Peter,
Mm,
and it happens to be the very passage. One of them is the very passage we're concerned about, where Jesus does or does not show mercy. And
mm,
this papyrus is older than both of the other things, and it showed Jesus forgave them all and took them up and baptized them and took them up into heaven.
mm,
And so it was changed, and so it was. But then the question is, why was it changed, and why was the original version so problematic that people left it out of the New Testament?
mhm,
And what I argue in the book is this part would be pretty interesting to people, I think,
mhm,
because a lot of people know that throughout the history of Christianity, there have been Christians who have argued that everybody in the end gets saved.
mhm,
Um, this was never the majority view in Christianity, even though some people claim it was, but it absolutely was never the majority view. But it was a marginal view,
mhm,
and there were different ways people explain why and how it is people will all be saved. And in this Apocalypse of Peter, is because Christ shows mercy on everybody.
mhm,
So that's a sensible solution. Another solution that people had was that Christ is more powerful than the powers of evil, and
mhm,
so the powers of evil cannot win. In the end, he's going to conquer the powers of evil, and he's going to overcome all evil. And so evil will be destroyed and hell will be taken out, and everybody will be saved because of Christ's power.
mhm.
So Christ is more powerful than Adam, because I mean Adam made everybody sin, but Christ got to be more powerful than that. And so
Right.
he's going to give everybody salvation. And you can
Yeah.
find suggestions of that in the writings of Paul. I mean, so they
Mhm,
could make a base. So what ends up happening in the 3rd century, a church father named Origen, who was the most important theologian before St. Augustine,
mhm,
the most important theologian before the Council of Nicaea, say.
mhm,
Um, he developed an idea that salvation would come to all people, and his view was that since God is ultimately sovereign And since in the end, every knee shall bow to Christ. And since in the end, so in the end, God's going to have his way.
Mhm.
And in Origen's view, it's not just going to happen in this age, because a lot of people don't believe they go get punished and after they die. But God's going to have another age in
Mm.
which they have another chance, and then another age. There's going to be like thousands of ages until finally everybody gets it, because in the
Right.
end, nobody can resist God forever.
Right.
And so
Yeah.
everybody's going to be set. So that was his view, and it became a popular view in the end of the third century
Mhm.
among some theologians. But in the fourth century, there were theologians who wanted to put the kibosh on it,
Mhm.
and this was called the Originist Controversy, where church fathers like Jerome, for example, condemned this idea. Augustine condemned this idea of universal salvation,
Mhm.
and that's exactly when the Apocalypse of Peter started falling out of favor, and
Uh,
it's when the new editions got written. And so it's what I argue in my book is that it's a result of the Origenist controversy that the Apocalypse of Peter didn't make it in.
so you have like some are trying to evolve almost the ideas, and you have the others who are trying to hold it back, saying, no, 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 we can't let this doctrine, this theology go there. We have to reel it
That's
back in.
right. And
Yeah.
when they pull it back in, what they do is they intensify it,
Mm.
and they and so they double down on it,
Yeah.
the modern terminology, and so then it becomes such a part of that the universalist strain ended up being very much a minor thing throughout history,
Yeah.
although it's having a comeback today,
Mhm.
I mean, not just kind of liberal types who want everybody to be good, but I mean, even conservatives are saying, look, God's not a monster. He's not going to be torturing people for 2 trillion years
Right.
for sins they committed for 20, and
Yeah.
then that's 2 trillion is only the beginning. I mean, are you kidding me? No.
Yeah.
So people are saying, yeah, that don't make sense. And
Yeah.
so
And he's a
there's a
good father, right? So what a good father would do.
and he loves people. Look, and
Right.
he doesn't want to torture you forever.
Yeah.
A few million years will be enough.
Right.
Whatever.
Right. All right, so let's shift gears a little bit and talk about Jesus. The last section of the book talks about the power of Christ and the harrowing of hell, where you kind of
Mhm.
address this idea that Jesus died when he died, and then before he rose, he went down to hell and he did something. He had coffee with the prisoners or had a fight with the devil, whatever it is he did. But we could talk about that in a moment. But first, you mentioned it a little while ago, but can you talk to me about Jesus's understanding of hell? And I know this probably goes a little bit more into the heaven and hell
Yeah.
book, but I think it's an important topic
Yeah.
because hell is one of those doctrines, like the first one that I really began to ask questions about,
Mm.
and the same with a lot of our listeners. And asking questions about it, then my eventual like public declaration that I just don't really believe in it, I lost a lot of friends over that one. And as people kind of unfriended me and walked
Uh,
away, like one of the comments I got was, well, you should go back and reread your Bible because Jesus talked more about hell than anything and anyone else. And so I'd love for you to respond to that piece of criticism because on the surface of our English translations, like it can appear that way, right? Like hell seems to be all over the place. But I've come to realize, obviously, that going beneath the surface of the biblical text can reveal a lot than just kind of a quick read of our English
yeah.
NIV translation or whatever. So Jesus talks about hell more than anyone or anything else. Put this to rest for us, Bart.
Well, there are several things to be said. One thing is
Yeah.
it's just not true. If you just look up the word hell in the, I mean, it's just not true.
Mhm.
I learned that too when I was a young evangelical, and uh, what I mean, Jesus talks about the kingdom of God
Mhm.
far more than he
Yeah.
talks about hell, and so in fact, so that's just if you have an English translation that translates the word in question as the
Mhm.
word hell.
Right.
And the bigger deal is that it's a complete mistranslation.
Mm.
Um, and so much, I mean, a lot of translations are getting away from it. So the deal is this: there is a word in Greek that you can find in Greek literature,
Mhm.
and you can find in uh, non-Christian Greek literature that refers to the place of torment that people might go to if they've lived badly.
Mhm.
Okay, it's the word Tartarus. Tartarus is the place where people, they can get punished.
Mhm.
Uh, and that word does not occur in the words of Jesus ever. Jesus does not use that word.
Mhm.
Uh, there are places that translators have translated as hell, in the words of Jesus, and it's not the Greek word for hell. It's an Aramaic word, Gehenna.
Mm-hmm.
Gehenna. And so Jesus says, for example, that if your right hand sins, cut it off, because it is better for you to enter the kingdom of God maimed,
Mm-hmm.
than to be cast into Gehenna, whole. And so, in other words, Gehenna, you don't want to be tossed into Gehenna. Oh my God, you do not want to be tossed into Gehenna. So this is it's an Aramaic phrase that
Mm-hmm.
that now a lot of translations are just leaving it as Gehenna, because it absolutely does not mean hell. We know what Gehenna is because it's a biblical term.
Mm-hmm.
It first appears in the Bible in the book of Judges. You also find it in Second Kings
Mm-hmm.
and in Jeremiah. It's a Gehenna is a place outside of Jerusalem.
Mm-hmm.
It's a valley that is in the Old Testament. It's called a Gehinnom, and it's it's a valley that was owned by a guy named Hinnom. And so and you can find that just in the Old Testament. I mean, it says it, but in the Old Testament, this place outside of Jerusalem, it's a valley to the southwest of Jerusalem.
Mm-hmm.
It had a very nasty reputation in Jewish thinking and in the Old Testament, especially in Second Kings and Jeremiah, because this was the place that some faithless Israelites practiced human sacrifice.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't just that they were like killing humans in sacrifice, they're killing children. It was child sacrifice, where they were burning children to a Canaanite divinity, Moloch.
Mm-hmm.
And so the in the book of Second Kings, and especially in Jeremiah, this is portrayed as the most desecrated, God-forsaken place on the planet,
Mm-hmm.
where these horrible activities are going on that had nothing to do. And it's set up in a nice contrast, because this valley outside of Jerusalem, if you look up, you can see the temple of God,
Mm-hmm.
where the true God is. So he's up high and this is down low. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So you kind of get a heaven and hell thing going
Yeah.
on in the thinking of it. So the deal is that it's a little bit hard for some people to get their minds around. But in the ancient world, almost everybody on record was terrified of not getting a proper burial.
Mm-hmm.
Today, most people want to look. People today want a proper burial, right? You
Mm-hmm.
die, you don't. You want to have a nice burial. You want to know how many people come to your funeral. I mean,
Sure.
you want to, you just like and you want something good to happen. If you do not want your body to be your corpse to be desecrated,
Yeah.
right, or to be torn apart by animals, or be booted, stamped on by enemies and things. You just don't want that. In the ancient world, this was a real terror that's testified throughout all sorts of ancient literature.
Mm-hmm.
Jesus is saying that if you are living a life of sin, you're not only not going to get a proper burial, you're going to be tossed into this god awful place that is forsaken of anything decent, and that's where your remains are going to be without a burial. So
Mm-hmm.
you don't want that. So when Jesus talked about Gehenna, that's what he's talking about. He's talking about this
Interesting.
valley where a corpse might be tossed.
Yeah.
And so the other thing to say about this is that when Jesus does talk about what's going to happen to people, sorry, this is going to go on for a second. Is that okay?
Yeah, please keep going. Yeah, keep going.
No. So the other thing, so this is the big point in my book, Heaven and
Mm-hmm.
Hell. Today, people have this idea that,
Mm-hmm.
of course, we've inherited. We all had this idea growing up, and most people still do, that when you die, your body dies, but your soul goes one place or another.
Yeah.
And in my book, Heaven and Hell, what I tried to show is that that's not in the Bible, because that's not what the Old Testament imagines, and it's not what Jesus thought about. In Greek thinking, like in Plato, that's
Mm-hmm.
right. Plato thought that your soul could not die,
Mm-hmm.
but your body would die. And so the soul is immortal. It can't die. And Plato devotes a number of his writings to trying to show that the soul is immortal.
Mm-hmm.
But in Jewish thinking, that wasn't the way it was. In Jewish thinking, it's not that a human being is made up of body and soul
Mm-hmm.
as two separate things, one of which lives on and one dies.
Mm-hmm.
It was that the human is one thing. It's a physical body that has life breathed into it.
Mm-hmm.
The soul is your life breath. So when God created Adam, he makes his lump of dirt on the ground, humanoid, but it's just a lump of dirt. But then he breathes into it.
Mhm.
And when the breath comes into it, it becomes a human being. And so humans are humans only when they have the breath of life in them.
Mm.
And so a human doesn't exist until they can breathe.
Mhm.
And when they stop breathing, they're no longer a human being. They don't exist anymore.
Mm.
So it's more like the ancient Jewish thinking was more like we think of the breath,
Mhm.
and the word is actually the same as breath, pneuma, the spirit, the breath. Um, when you're breathing, you're alive. When you stop breathing, your breath doesn't go anywhere.
Mhm.
It's not like it exists. You just stop breathing, and that's
Right.
what Jesus thought about when you died. So when Jesus talks
Mm.
about the afterlife, what Jesus, as a good Jew, is saying is that he talks about a resurrection of the dead. He doesn't talk about the immortality of the soul. It's not that the soul lives on. Jesus says at the end of the age, dead will be raised from the dead. This is the Jewish idea that God will breathe the breath of life back into
Mm.
people and they will come back to life.
Mm.
And so for Jesus, the kingdom of God is not your soul going to heaven. The kingdom of God is a kingdom. It's
Mhm.
here on earth. God made this world a paradise. People were supposed to inhabit the paradise. People blew it, and it's been wretched ever since. But God's going to return people to paradise because he's going to raise them from the dead. Those who have been on God's side are going to enter into this glorious kingdom. And those who are opposed to God are going to be raised from the dead. They're going to be brought back to life to be shown the error of their ways.
Mm.
They're going to realize they botched it. And then God's going to destroy them in fire. But he's going to destroy them. They're going to be
Yeah.
destroyed. They're going to be annihilated.
Mm.
So there's no soul living on in heaven and hell. It's a body either entering into the kingdom or being destroyed.
Mm. So then how
That's a
do
long
yeah,
answer.
no, but that's a great answer, but then I guess it leads to, like a bigger question of how like do these ideas then make their way into the Christian faith because people were familiar with these ideas from Plato, like these ideas outside of Christianity. So as they perhaps read the Christian text, did they kind of bring in this thinking, like almost have it like a filter, like they're reading, for instance, like the Gospel of Matthew, and they're reading that, but they're reading it through the filter of what they've read somewhere else?
Yeah, well, that's a good way to put it because what the part of Jesus teaching that this resurrection was coming was that
Hmm.
it's coming soon.
Right.
uh, the disciples won't die before it happens. This
Hmm.
generation won't pass away before it happens. And they're expecting it to happen right away, and
Hmm.
it doesn't happen right away.
Hmm.
But it involves a kind of a dualism where you've got this world we're living in now that's wicked,
Hmm.
ruled by the forces of evil, but God's going to destroy them and bring in this good kingdom, and there'll be a resurrection, and some people enter into this kingdom. So it's sort of a now and then thing that you could put on a horizontal timeline,
Hmm.
but it's dualism,
Hmm.
uh, now and then. What ends up happening is the now, the now doesn't stop. So like the end doesn't come, but while it's not when it doesn't happen, most people converting to Christianity are not Jews.
Hmm.
By the end of the first century, the vast majority of people who have become Christian were Gentiles, meaning they were raised in Greek ways of thinking. They were raised in the Roman Empire with Greek thought. So
Hmm.
it's not that they read Plato's, you know, books necessarily, but this is how people thought that when you
Right.
die, your soul and so when they convert, they keep the dualism. It hasn't happened yet. Well, Jesus must not have been it's going to happen right away because it didn't
Hmm.
happen. But they already have the idea of a different kind of dualism, and this horizontal dualism becomes a vertical dualism.
Hmm.
It's about above and below.
Hmm.
And what happens isn't that your body's raised and you live forever here. What happens is you die and your soul goes up
Hmm.
to God. But since the soul is immortal, it can't die. That means the people who are wicked also can't die.
Hmm.
So the soul then is punished forever, not destroyed.
Hmm.
And so that's where you get heaven and hell. So it's really kind of a fusion of Plato and Jesus. By
Hmm.
people, of course, who didn't know Plato, but I mean, it's roughly speaking, that's what it is—a combination of Greek thought and Jewish thought.
Sure. It's just interesting to me how things evolve and change as different cultures kind of got involved in things because like
Yeah.
you said it was very Jewish way of thinking, but then as the gospel spread to these other cultures and they started coming in with their own thoughts, it just evolved and changed that thing that had always been there.
Well, it still does, obviously. I mean,
Yep.
American evangelical Christianity it's impossible to convince an American evangelical Christian that Jesus did not believe in democracy and that he wasn't a capitalist.
Right.
But there was no such thing as democracy in his part
Yeah.
of the world, and
Wow.
capitalism didn't come around for 1900 years. But they just think, well, of course he was. That's the right thing. And so,
Right.
no, I get that. Not just
Sure.
evangelicals, of course, most Christians, but yeah, things change depending on your own environment.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. All right, so last question. Let's go back to the idea of Jesus going to hell on Saturday between the crucifixion and the resurrection. And I want to ask about that because, like, I'm no theologian, I'm not a Bible scholar, I'm not a historian, but I know like just enough to be a little dangerous. But from what I can tell, the only like real New Testament passage that to me is even a little bit convincing that maybe alludes to this idea is in First Peter, where it talks about something weird like Jesus went to spirits who were in prison and he preached to those who were disobedient, something about God building the ark or Noah building the ark, things like that. But it seems strange to me that like an obscure verse like that could maybe be merged with some other obscure verses from different letters to make this claim that a lot of Christians really believe is like really important because I've had people tell me like they insist that this happened and it's
Mm,
so clear and so evident in the Bible and you have
uh-huh.
to believe it because that's what it is. Jesus went to hell so he wouldn't have to things like that. But maybe you could bring our conversation to a close. Like when did this idea make its way into Christianity? Was it always there? Was it more of a vague idea early on and became more concrete later? Like, where did this come from?
Yeah, so it's a great question, and I have a chapter on this
Mhm.
in the Journeys book
Yep.
because it is such an interesting question. They call it the harrow. It became the doctrine of the harrowing
Mhm.
of hell. And what I think happened, I don't think that what happened is that people read First Peter and they came up with this doctrine. Oh yes, this is it. Because when you read that passage in First Peter, it is really confusing. And I know scholars have written there are entire books written on that verse.
Mhm.
I'm trying to figure out what it means. So it's not like straightforward. And what's it got to do with the
It's a
Noah
really
building
weird
an ark?
verse too. It's strange. Yeah.
It's a strange verse.
Yeah.
And what's it got to do with Noah building an ark? And who are these people who are disobedient? And why is
Right.
he preaching only to them? What is it? What is that?
Yeah.
And so I think what happened was I don't think that was the starting point. I think the
Mhm.
starting point was people started wondering, Jesus died on a Friday and he gets raised on a Sunday. What's he doing in the meantime? I mean, does he go to heaven for a while, or does he just stay dead, like unconscious for a while? Or
Mhm.
and they started thinking about it. And one of the things that entered into their thought was, Jesus died for the sins of the world, but does that apply only to people who are alive now and who are going to be
Mhm.
alive after us? Because people before him couldn't believe in him. So that doesn't seem fair.
Mhm.
So how could his salvation go to people who died already? And
Mhm.
they put those two questions together. What was he doing in the meantime? And how could people hear who had died already? And they came up with the idea, well, like everyone else, he went to the realm of the dead.
Mhm.
And so and then the question was, well, what was he doing down there?
Mhm.
Um, and people started thinking, look, if he's fully human, humans go to the place of the dead, and so he's got to go to the place of the dead.
Mhm.
Okay, but on the other hand, he is the savior of the world, and surely he was doing something down there.
Mhm.
And there were two schools of thought that developed. One was that he went down there to preach the gospel, and that he preached to those who had died already. He preached to people while he was alive.
Mhm.
Now that he's dead, he preaches to people who'd already died. And the other view is that he didn't go down there to preach. He went down there to assert his power.
Mhm.
Like his death brought about the salvation of the world, and he's the most powerful person ever lived. And he's going down there to assert salvation in the
Mhm.
underworld. So
Mhm.
those are the two views. But within those two views, there are also two other views. Is he doing this for just for the saints, or is he doing it for everyone?
Everybody.
Is he trying to save everybody, or is he just talking to Abraham and Isaac and Jacob and all them?
Mhm.
And so these views develop over time, and it's not really until it takes several centuries before you get the whole idea that Christ went down there to save people.
Mhm.
And so in my book, I talk about a really interesting gospel that most people have never heard of or read that they should, called the Gospel of Nicodemus.
Mhm.
So it's about 400 years after our gospels. It's a great. Jesus goes down there, and he goes down there with vengeance.
Mm.
He's gonna destroy Hades and the devil, and he's gonna assert his power. And he goes down there, he gets everybody out of
Yeah.
there.
That's awesome. In that book, I have this book here I was going to show our listeners too, is the Lost Scriptures, and the Apocalypse of Peter is in here, and a whole bunch of other ones. So that's one that people should pick up as well. Yeah. Awesome. Well, hey Bart, we're just about out of time, but this has been a lot of fun. As expected, you always deliver some fascinating things. So thanks for taking time for me.
Yeah, you're welcome. This has been great.
And real quick, two things. You're coming out, I think, with a book on Revelation. Is that correct? Do you want to mention anything about that?
I do. Thanks.
Yeah.
So it's coming out in March.
Mhm.
The book is called Armageddon, and the subtitle is "What the Bible Really Teaches About the End."
Mhm.
The Book of Revelation is, I think, probably the least read and most misunderstood book on the
Yeah.
planet, a Christian book. And my view, what I argue in the book, is that almost everybody's understanding of it is wrong. It's not predicting what's going to happen in the future. It's not
Mhm.
meant to predict what's going to happen in our future. But I go on to show that the view that I always held, that a lot of liberal scholars hold about the book, is also wrong.
Mhm.
That it's not a book that's really preaching hope for those who are suffering. It does provide hope for some people, but basically, it's the word hope never occurs in the book of Revelation.
Mhm.
Words that occur are words like blood and vengeance and wrath. And
Mhm.
it's ooh. So
Not a
so
happy
anyway,
book.
so my book is about how reading Revelation as a prediction of our future has caused so many problems. And I even go into things like American foreign policy,
Yeah.
and I go into
Mm.
um, uh, people making these predictions, and like people selling the farm as a result, thinking the end's coming soon, and
Yeah.
like all sorts of things like that. So
Yeah.
there's so that's the book, and I really I think of yeah. Every time I write a book, I think, well, that's the best book I've ever written.
Right.
so, so I certainly think that about this one. I think this one is really kind of. I think it's important because so many people misread this in dangerous ways. I think.
Yeah, I think it's like you said, the most maybe unread or misread, but also the most misapplied. I mean, you just have so many different people apply it in so many different ways. You can get lost in the mix of not really what is this book even about? It's very confusing.
Yeah, well, and even things like, I mean, your older audience will remember David Koresh and the Branch Davidians.
Mm,
Boy, that whole fiasco was largely because of a misreading of the Book of Revelation.
yeah,
And so,
yeah,
it's,
yeah.
yeah.
You said March, right? March.
March, yeah, it's coming
Okay.
out in March.
And then lastly, your blog. I'd like you to mention that
Yeah,
because I want to
yeah.
invite people to sign up for that because you're doing really good work with it.
Well, thanks. I know the blog. So I started this blog about 10 years ago,
Hmm.
and I decided I'm going to post 5 times a week at least on issues relating to the New Testament and early Christianity, and I do
Hmm.
post 1,000 words, 1,400 words right in there somewhere, and I
Hmm.
posted every five times a week every week for 10 years,
Hmm.
and people have access to the whole archives. People who belong to the blog, they can ask questions. I answer every question I get on the blog.
Yeah.
And so it's grown significantly. I thought we would raise a few $1,000s when I started this thing, and we're now raising hundreds of thousands of dollars. We've raised over $1.5 million on this blog because there's a small membership fee.
Hmm.
Um, the fee can be small because if you get a lot of people paying a small fee, you get a lot of
Sure.
money.
You're
But
right.
it is not expensive at all. It's very it starts like $2.99 a month,
Yeah.
and but for that amount, you get access to all of this stuff, and you can make comments on my posts, and I answer the comments. But so it's a really good thing. But the deal is, I don't get any of the money.
Hmm.
Um, don't get a penny from it.
Hmm.
It all goes to charity. It all goes to charities that mainly help people who are the hungry and the homeless.
That's really
And
good.
so, yeah, so that's the point. So I hope people will at least check it out, the Bart Ehrman blog, and think about joining.
Excellent. Well, I'll put all the links in the show notes and we'll do this again maybe when Revelation comes out. Maybe we'll do it again.
Sounds great.
Thanks,
Okay.
Bart.
Okay. Great. Thanks.